For a beautiful introduction. Thanks to all of you for taking time to join us this evening. I hope it's going to be interesting for you. I would like to check quickly, where are you guys? Maros, I was told you're in Brussels?
Yes, currently I am, yeah.
We haven't met yet, have we?
I don't think so,
No?
but I would be very pleased to meet you.
Yes, absolutely. Johan, you're somewhere in France?
Yeah, I'm in the cafe, that's why it's noisy, sorry for that. I will take
Where
some
in
notes.
France is that?
Yeah, I'm in Warsaw right now. The last time I was in France, and now I live in Poland. Yeah.
Okay, and you, Victoria?
I'm actually in Kiev, Ukraine. Just escaped from a working meeting to be with you.
Excellent. What is your level of understanding of EU from 1 to 5? 5, good. Maros, 6. 4, Johan?
What is 5 for you?
You can be the commissioner.
Then 3.5 or 4. I don't know.
You know what a commissioner is also good enough. I just wanted to establish a little bit of like an understanding of how much you know really, because the last time we had our session, it was with people from outside of the European continent mainly. So we had an American, if I remember well, we had an Indian guy. So we really discussed the basics of how the EU governance works and what are the institutions. And
my level of understanding is like I start to understand why Tusk is there at the G7 and the president of the Commission is there too, but why Tusk is there at the dinner but not the president of the Commission.
Well, now Juncker is not there because he's sick, so it's the first time in history.
That's the reason.
When the president of the Commission is not there because he had an operation in August, so he's not in the state to travel. And G7 is one of the unique formats where you cannot have a replacement. So it's either him in his function or the seat is empty. So that's why. Is there some specific expectations you have from this evening? I don't know if you had a chance to look me up and see who I am, if there's something specific about my story that interests you, so that or you can immediately just tell me and ask me the questions. Otherwise, I can give you a bit of an intro about my story and then we can dig deeper. But if there's something that you already know that you would like to know, just tell me. Nada?
Yeah, I would have a question because I looked you up, obviously, because that's what you do, I guess. And I see that you're working for the DG Grow. Is it still, is it correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm currently, in my internship, I'm also dealing with the topics of small and middle-sized enterprises, and I would be really interested in your line of work. Simply, what can you do from the European policy level to support small and medium-sized enterprise?
Okay, good. Anything else? Johan and Victoria? Victoria?
Yeah, I would being a researcher myself and very curious about disintegration tendencies in the EU and of course the fragmentation tendencies in the EU. I'm not talking only about the Brexit, but just as a matter of fact, as an approach. And a second one, Europe of regions. It's something I'm also curious for, but I'm just asking it as a reflection, your personal reflection on that. That's something that I'm researching currently.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm gonna take notes.
Yeah, I think you'll present your political what you did and what you wanted to fight for. Maybe present other aspects of your biography if you deem it necessary. And from European institutions, something we cannot have from theory is the feelings you have and the feelings people have working there. Among others, whether they feel useful or not, things like that.
Okay.
But on insider things that you cannot learn, even though you know a lot of theory.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So so I don't know, Adi, if you want to add something.
I think it's go ahead, and when I need to add something or when I will have a need to add something, I will. I think there has been like practical things, and this is great because it won't be that theoretical it was last time. So we can really take a lot of practice from
Yeah. Okay, so since all of you are European, and I take Ukraine as being part of our closer circle of Europe as well, I see that you already have some basics, and obviously you know about the position of Brussels in European Union. I guess you know about the main European institutions. So I work in the European Commission, which is the body which has the legislative initiative power. So we are the guys here, tens of thousands of us actually, who basically, based on the political guidelines that we receive and based on the work program that is annually agreed with the member states, we propose the legislative initiatives, which then go through the interinstitutional co-decision process, depending on what kind of policy area it is and what competency is given to at the European level to regulate or not regulate given policy area. This determines what kind of tools we can use and what kind of legislative acts or not we can be adopting. So if it's a legislative act, then it goes from the Commission to the other two institutions, which is the European Parliament and the Council, where the member states vote for the proposals. So that's usually the most important thing that people outside of our bubble don't understand, where they think that it's the anonymous bureaucrats deciding on our behalf and the member states have actually nothing to do with what's happening in Brussels. This is one of the most important myths that I'm on the mission to kind of kill, and I really appreciate when whoever, like people like also you who understand a little bit more about how the EU works. I think it's really important whenever we find ourselves in these debates in bars full of cliches and straw men and urban legends about bananas and whatsoever. I think it's really important that we ourselves engage in these conversations and explain and break these myths for people to understand that Europe is ours and that it's us, our representatives, like really people like us deciding. That's very important, like not from an academic perspective, but really I think for the future of Europe, as you asked about the disintegration tendencies. I think they wouldn't be there if people understood, if we invested also as institutions and as politicians and also as citizens, if we invested much more in building this ownership. But it's not an ownership that is kind of the 80s vision of democracy, where the politicians decide something on our behalf and then a law lands on our tables. I think the third millennium democracy is really where all of us takes responsibility for where this integration project is going. And that's why I think it's important that we don't look up to institutions as serving, like giving us products, but we look at institutions as one piece of a food chain, which is basically playing its role, but each and every one of us has a role in this food chain if we want Europe to work and if we want everybody around us to understand how it works. That was also one of the, I don't know if you had a chance to look at my profile, but the part of the European Commission, so European Commission is split in directorates general, which is like the ministries if it was a government. And so when Maros asked about DG Grow, this is the Directorate General, which is part of the European Commission, which is called GROW as an abbreviation, which is the part of the Commission that in full name is called Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, small and medium enterprises. So that is the part of the Commission which is really responsible for the industrial policy, as if it was a Ministry of Industry and Economy and Internal Market. Many people have no clue what the internal market is, so we don't really, we don't really use the term outside in our context, but we feel it's the heart of the European Union on which the EU was really based when they started building it and removing the customs for cross-border flow of goods and services. That's where the heart of internal market was being constructed when member states started removing the barriers to free movement of goods and services across the EU. So this part of the European Commission where I work is responsible for one, removing the barriers to doing business across the EU when it comes to trading goods and services, and free movement of people and businesses a little bit as well. And two, working to support competitiveness of the businesses who work on the internal market. So it's not just doing away with the customs, it's also removing the administrative barriers, working a lot on standards, working a lot on all kinds of business practices, red tape, providing financial instruments, financial help, all kinds of policy tools that we have in our menu, in our portfolio, to help businesses be founded more quickly, grow quickly as startups, then scale up, which is one of the biggest challenges of the business environment in Europe, where most of the policy discourse or media discourse is often focused on startups as being the cool job of the future and everybody wanting to work in startups, and we speak about not having our European Google and not having our unicorns, but the discourse oftentimes lacks the second phase after the startup, which is the scale up, and how can you really grow into a Google in the European level and survive without having to exit or sell or move to the US. So that's a big part of our focus. And so coming back to what I was saying about the explanations, or explaining and working on the buy-in of the general public, this was one of the triggers for me to decide to present myself in the European elections that were basically on this year in May. One of the reasons, there were several reasons when people ask me, why the hell would you do this to yourself? Because typically a person working in the European administration wouldn't go into the politics because it's seen as another world, like a mantra that I heard here often was the virginity of political opinion that we have is the only thing we have, and you better not mess with it, because once you lose it, there's no way of going back. And so I was like, this is not the way I look at things. I think things are getting more and more political, and I think we are much more responsible as public servants for what's happening outside. I think our job doesn't end. It's not a 9-to-5 job where once we're out of office, we're done with our public service. I think the things have gotten serious enough over past years with all the disintegration tendencies for us to think that we're done with our 9-to-5 job. And so my thinking was that there's all this narrative about EU probably falling apart. There are the statistics which show for Slovakia that we are always in the last places of the turnout for the European elections. So in the previous ones, 2014, Slovakia had the lowest 13% turnout in the EU elections. This time it got higher to 22, but we're still the last ones. And so there is this participation in democracy problem for me, which in Slovakia has multiple reasons, but one of them is also not understanding of EU. So we're not doing a good job in being out there and explaining what the hell EU is, what does it give people in their everyday practical life, what are the benefits that they consume every day. Then another reason why I decided to run was the murder of journalists that happened last year. Slovakia went through a very tragic year last year when one of the journalists and his fiancée were killed for investigative work that they're doing of a corruption scandal that is still ongoing and is being investigated now. So it triggered really this momentum of call for complete revamp of how public discourse looks like in Slovakia, and who does public service and who is in the political leadership running the country. And then the third reason was that the past almost 3 years now, I've been working on Brexit here in DigiGrow, where I'm working in this directorate for internal market and industry. I've been the coordinator of the whole Brexit process. So that means that the Brexit negotiations that were ongoing now for the past 2 years, which resulted into the draft withdrawal deal, whatever is in the deal that is related to how you place goods on the market, how you do business, how do you import medical products? How do you do public procurement? How do you set up companies? How can you practice your profession in case you are in what we call regulated profession? For instance, if you've studied medicine or law, this is professions that are regulated at the national level, and so there's rules around how you can move it from one member state to another. This is going to have very brutal consequences on businesses around the EU, and so I was in charge of kind of making sure that we extract the right knowledge, expertise from our experts in our directorate, and how it's going to be reflected in the deal. And so having worked on this, like really day-to-day work on thinking through, like doing the analysis, preparing the scenarios, looking for time bombs, looking for like what is it that's going to fall apart in our value chains because we're so integrated with the UK, being in daily contact with the businesses who are asking us what are going to be the consequences on our business, being in daily contact with the families who were also asking like, am I supposed to like move out of the UK, like be done, sell my house and go home to Slovakia, or what the hell am I supposed to do with my future of my family? This was a very deep experience of living through the consequences that most of the people have started waking up to only later in the process. And so me last year, I got to like this mental phase of what's the point of me working in the European Commission and being one of the most innovative, or whatever you call it, policy officers here, and being involved in all kinds of cool stuff and preparing very cool policies for the future, if once we get to the European elections, Slovakia has very low turnout. We had brutal rise of extremism in Slovakia, with like neo-Nazi being very like increasingly popular. So I got to this mental state of where am I going to be most useful? Is it working on the policies in the European Commission, or is it actually stepping out of my comfort zone and really doing the footwork in my country and trying to explain what we do to the citizens and trying to get them being more motivated to show up in the elections and like this arrive at a much more pro-European result, at least in my country, that I can influence, and hopefully if the result of the elections was more pro-European across the continent, then it would create much more positive political platform for us as the European Commission to create much more pro-European and ambitious policies over the 5 years. So it was as if it were also a little bit of an egoistic kind of move, saying, there's no point for us like working on these policies here if the European Parliament becomes so extremist that we will not manage to push our policies through the other house. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to present myself. It was a very interesting experiment for me as my identity, for us as the institution, because it was a challenge for us procedurally to set up the process and the split of my identity, so that at every stage of the process it's very clear who am I talking, on behalf of whom I'm speaking, because I wouldn't want to create this confusion of walking around the country as a political candidate and giving an impression that people somehow take this as an opinion of the European Commission. That would be very risky. So I always kind of communicate all these disclaimers about like speaking on my own behalf, and this like whatever I'm saying shouldn't be taken as an official communication of the European Commission. And so it was interesting at all levels to see how the institution was reacting to my experiment, how my colleagues and my bosses were reacting to it, and then going through the whole experiment of learning how do you go about like recreating your identity in your own country where you haven't lived for a while. How do you build a brand? How do you finding the right compromise between who do you want to be, what do you want to bring in the campaign, what are the values that you want to stand for, and on the other hand, what is it that the strategists say are going to work in the political fight, what do they think the voters are going to reward in the political competition. So it's a constant, like everyday subtle choices that one has to be making around building one's own brand, around every single post that you're posting on the social media, what are the values that you're going to be communicating, how far are you going to go in the provocation, in the blame game, in the attacks, because every conversation that you're going into, you're doing it to win people's support. And so you can either jump on the usual way of doing politics, or you can try to create your own way of doing things without having much experience, obviously, of what has any chance of working, and without knowing whether you can trust your gut feeling, because the gut feeling is not really based on any expertise. And the biggest challenge is who are going to be the people that you surround yourself with, who's going to be your closest team, who has partially the competence or the mandate to be partially your voice, your mouth out there when they're helping you with the communication. Are the people aligned with your values and your vision, and are they good enough to help you create an impactful campaign out of what you want to bring into the space? And so I've been working on like setting up the team and setting up the whole operation for a couple of months, and then as of March, I was full-time in Slovakia, so I took a sabbatical, took a break from my job, and for 3 months I was basically traveling around Slovakia, doing debates, being out there in the regions, doing the food work, handing out leaflets, and engaging in these like very interesting conversations on the ground, and then in between doing my online campaign and shooting videos and writing articles and blogs and dealing with all the hate on my Facebook and trying to figure out how you do all of this with very little money, with very little expertise, with very little strategic advice. So it's been a very, very transformative life experience. I wasn't elected, obviously, as you can see that I'm back to my job now in the European Commission now. But I was very happy with the result. I got almost 15,000 personal votes, which is a very good result for the zero name recognition that I had at the beginning, and for basically what the election mathematics is in Slovakia. So I'm happy with that. And I hope it was also very useful for the people who I had the chance to meet, because that was the most rewarding part actually of the campaign, being out there and seeing how much people appreciate meeting a real person from Brussels, because they've never had a chance to meet either national politician or not even a European politician. So for them, having a chance to meet the person who can help them with busting all these myths around how Brussels works and what is it like, on which basis we produce things, and like what are the benefits it gives them. That was the most rewarding part, to see how this conversation is shifting people's perception of Europe, and how through this like super vulnerable human contact, they are then willing to show up in the elections and contribute to their voice counting a little bit more than what it usually does. And so that's what I've been through over the last half a year. And then as of June, I got back to Brussels, to my previous job, which is a role, what we call here, a policy assistant of a director, which is like an advisory role where in the hierarchy, every directorate is, the whole ministry, if it was, is split in, is called Directorate General, which is composed of directorates. So it has multiple directors as a medium management level. And some of them have this kind of advisor. So I'm working for this French guy who has around 100 people below him, organized it to 4 units. And so I'm helping him organize the work in the directorate with all the special operations and coordination. Today I was for half a day at the Brexit meeting, the first Brexit meeting that happened after summer. So the machinery starts rolling again, and we start like really brutally preparing for 1st November, because the odds are higher every day that it's not gonna end up not well without the deal. And so we invest a lot of energy into making sure that the businesses out there know how they can prepare, and they know where to look for information about consequences of the no-deal Brexit on their way of doing business. And so, so that's the stage where I'm now. a big part of work of what we do now is preparing for the new commission. So maybe you've heard, I don't know if you've heard of the process of hearings of the new commissioner. So as a result of the European Parliament elections, every government now has to nominate candidates for their commissioners. The deadline was yesterday. We're still waiting for France and Italy to nominate.
Can I ask about Italy, because it's super fantastic topic for me? I'm Italian expert, actually.
Are you? Wow. Well, I'm not. I only have Italian friends here. I mean, colleagues who are like super frustrated about what's happening in Italy in the past months and years, really. And so now, no wonder that they haven't nominated anyone, given what happened last week. So, which is unfortunate, because both countries are too important for Europe for us to be able to move on without knowing what they want and who they're presenting.
Can I just immediately ask about clarifying these things in the procedure? And I don't want to interrupt you, but just thank you for taking that into the talk. If the country doesn't nominate a commissioner, or like kind of some names for the commissioner, what will be the procedures in this case?
It's not, this is not the procedural question, because they have to. So it's just the question of political compromise being found, and it's clear that this week the president-elect, Madame von der Leyen, has talks with all the capitals. So we know that UK will not nominate anybody. They published a statement where they said that obviously they count to be out by the time the new commission is in place, so they will not nominate anybody, but the others have to. So it's really just a question of political chaos in Italy, and they will have to make up their mind. There hasn't been a precedent, and it's not really on the agenda that people would be discussing that they are not going to do it. It's just a question of...
I'm sorry, just on this issue shortly, if you can hear me, although there's music. For the new commissioners, are the new commissioners for only until October, or starting from October with Ursula von der Leyen?
So the existing commission is in place until the new one is elected. So we have our commissioners keep on coming to work, and they will keep on voting for whatever proposals we come out with. And so the new commissioners now, once we hear the names, we call them commissioner designate. So it's a person that's been kind of nominated by the member state to potentially become a commissioner. So then the puzzle starts being created by the president-elect. Once she knows the names and once she knows the profiles of the people, she will start putting together this puzzle of which country could get which portfolio, and there's all kinds of parameters that come into play when she's deciding what to give to whom. And then these people will have a couple of weeks to prepare for the hearings. So we spend a lot of energy here preparing the materials for them. So they will get hundreds of pages from us with a description of what the portfolio is, what are the sensitivities, what is the history, what is our wish as the administration for the vision of a future of the policy file. The person will get these hundreds of pages. They will be supposed to learn them through a process that we'll put into place to help them prepare. And then in October, early October, there will be these hearings in Strasbourg, where every commissioner designate will be grilled by the European Parliament on questions that there's a prescribed format around who can ask how many questions. Obviously, they will not know what the questions are. And so after this grilling, the European Parliament will vote. There's a vote of confidence in the European Parliament on whether they trust this ensemble of people, this group of people, that they can fulfill the program that the president is offering as the program of the next commission. And only once they will have voted the confidence of the new commission will come into place, and the existing commissioners will go home.
Yeah. So between around June, when the new parliament was elected, and October, it's the new parliament and the old commission, and there is no responsibility of the new commission towards the new parliament.
Yeah, you can put it like that. Yes. I mean, also it's a special process, a special phase of a life cycle of the European Commission, in a sense that they are still working, but no legislative activity is ongoing, especially exactly for this reason, as you're saying. So whatever were the legislative proposals of this commission, they must have been voted by mid-July, when was the mid-July was the last session of the outgoing European Parliament. So no, that was in March, sorry. But whatever, there was a little bit of an overlap when all legislative proposals could have been voted by the outgoing European Parliament, and now the European Commission can be taking decisions which are Commission decisions, which are independent of the other legislative bodies. So, for instance, on Brexit, we need to adopt a special legislative act which prolongs a validity of a certain piece of legislation, because it was supposed to expire in March with the old Brexit date, and now we want it to be valid until November. So then a commission decision can decide on things. So it's independent of the European Parliament. But any other legislative proposal that we would be working on now as a European Commission, it's kind of for the shelves and parked until the new Parliament is in place. So yeah, I hope I answered your question. What was the other question? So this is basically the phase that we are in now, trying to figure out like how to put together a story of a very complicated series of policies, while not knowing who our client is, because it's going to change a lot once we know who is the person who will get our portfolio, whether they have a clue about this policy area or not, what is their learning style, do they like reading, do they want meetings. So it's an interesting product design phase where we try to do as much work up front before we know the name, because then we will have a couple of weeks only and it's going to be brutally quick. Yeah?
Sorry, can I just reconfirm, is it kind of a transition book you're talking about? So the set of the documents that you transited from one commission to another, is there any kind of practice like that? Or is there transition books also between the old commission and the new parliament? So just in order to, to smoothly overcome the period of the old and the new legislative and, let's say, another legislative body.
There is, maybe you've heard the term of transition team. There is a transition team of the president designate and then president-elect. So once Ursula was voted as the future president, she was given a team from, like, she took part of her team from Germany, and then she was given part of her team from the European Commission. The people who help her prepare, set this whole operation up, obviously, because she doesn't know this space, she doesn't, know the procedures, etc. So she's got a transition team who help her transition from the Juncker to her becoming the new president. There is no such thing as transition book other than really the rules of operations to help her get the machinery rolling. The books that we are working on are called briefing books. So it's a briefing book, is the book where briefing is like a document that we always produce for our hierarchy, for our bosses, whenever they go for a meeting or a business trip abroad. We write briefings where we write basically what the file is about, what's happening on the file, what is it that we want them to say, really, as line to take in the meetings, what are the critical questions that they could be asked, what are the safe answers to the dangerous questions if they receive them, because the files are so complicated that obviously they cannot always know everything about all files. And so now this briefing book is really a book, because in our case, in our directorate, which is around 1,000 people, the book has like 400 pages where we describe everything about the files, what happened on each file in the past, what is important, what is the vision where we want to see it going for the next mandate. Then there is another book, let's say, which is exactly with these dangerous questions and answers, where we see it could be likely that European Parliament will ask certain questions, so that we help them prepare for what we feel could be likely asked. So yeah, so there's like multiple work streams running where we're trying to basically give various views of what is it that we're working on to help the preparation as easy as possible for them. But frankly, I find it like really fascinating, and I find it really admirable for all these people. If you look at it like from a human perspective, that let's say you've been a minister for regional affairs, and then you're given an energy portfolio, and so like you have 2-3 weeks to learn everything about what's happening in like all this super complicated energy legislation, the funding problems, the international, I mean, the global context is now so complicated and impacting everything that what we're doing, that these people are, it's not that they're geniuses, because it's more like a bit of a theater and political literacy that they have, communication mastery, where they have to surf out of questions where they have no clue basically what is the area that they're talking about. So I find it really fascinating to observe these people in action and see with how much calm they are preparing for this. It's like an exam at school, which is very political and very, very dangerous, because if one person is not credible enough and then has to be replaced, it then obviously complicates the whole process for the new commission to be in place as early as possible. Yeah. Voila. What are the other questions? So you were asking me the SMEs. So SMEs are the small and medium enterprises, which is around 98% of all businesses, around 60% of revenues. Basically, the whole economy by now is the SMEs, and we have the biggest share of the economy is produced by the small and medium enterprises, and that's why they are such a big focus of our work. So everything that we do is accompanied with what we call an SME test. So every policy that we create, we look at it through what is it going to mean for small and medium enterprises, including micro and family companies that we are looking at through like a special lens. And so what we do really is, so it's multiple levels. It's the perception it gives us. So every single standard or policy or legislation that we're producing, we look at what are going to be the effects for the SMEs. So we try to be gentle and conscious of whether, like, when you bring all this legislative burden into an aggregate volume, like what is it going to actually mean for them? Is it still feasible? And then there's dedicated policy tools like funding. So there are many, probably you know structural funds, which is the funds that are distributed at the national level. And then there is money which is distributed at the European level, where the member states give a budget to the European Commission to distribute through big programs, because they agree that there's a reason why it has to be managed at a higher level, because it's more efficient, or because there are cross-border elements in the funding projects. Like, I don't, maybe you know Horizon 2020, for instance, which is a massive research program for funding research with cross-border elements across Europe. And so for SMEs, we have what's called COSME. So that is a program for competitiveness of SMEs, where through all kinds of calls, we give them funding to support their competitiveness and looking for partners in other countries, creating clusters so that they can build these cross-border collaborations and become more easily competitive at the cross-border level and have access to the other member states' markets, because that's the power of the European Union, that once you remove the barriers to cross-border sales of goods and services, that's where the market gets going and you get all these efficiencies and economies of scale. Unfortunately, we still have the barriers of the national legislation and of the language differences, which is why oftentimes we say that it's unfair to compare competitiveness of EU with the US, because of the language barriers that are just so brutal and don't exist in the US. So it creates completely different conditions for doing business, and the national legislation, where oftentimes in the US some competencies which are national in the European case are federal in the US case. So this again is a bit of comparing of apples and oranges, and so we are trying to create magic out of what is the distribution of the competencies here. Sometimes us as Europhiles, we would feel that some competencies like tax policy, for instance, would be beneficial to have part of it at the European level, and if it's not, it's difficult for member states, for companies from member states with high tax rates to be as competitive as SMEs from tax havens, really, that we also have in the EU. So yeah, I don't know, Maros, if there's anything specific about the SMEs that you're interested in. But yeah, there's a lot. If there's something that you want to know more concretely, I'm happy to send you links afterward. But yeah, it's a big SME brainwash that we have here.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction into your work. I was completely happy with what you shared with me. It's just currently I'm working on topics which involves questions on how could we how do EU policies affect SMEs. So it was nice to hear just like what is working behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you know all our websites and you know where to go, maybe where to look for more. Yeah, I don't know. What is? Yeah, ask me more. Huh? What are the other topics that interest you?
Shall I ask you all a series of questions? Yeah. May I be fast? Yeah. Okay. Is it? Can I say that DG Grow is maybe one of the most powerful of the elite DGs, maybe after agricultural? Am I right in saying that maybe there's the most competencies in agriculture and then in DG Grow? And then what are the executive competencies of DG Grow? We did not talk about. Also, if you dealt with Brexit, can we say that in the negotiation between London and the European Union thinks that London has more to lose in case of no deal, and it seems that Boris Johnson thinks or pretends that the EU has more to lose. Theresa May was obviously not of this mind. Do you have a position, an opinion of this? Do you know who has to lose more? I mean, if there's a full balance and if that's possible, because we know that different sectors are used differently. Also, how do you know, the relationship to the council? Is it like a sick relationship? Is it like a cancer, a watchdog, like guardians watching you? What about all the committees of the council? How do you deal with them? Is it a myth, comitology, or is it true? What's your relations to them? Do diplomats from member states feel more important than people inside the commission? Things like that. How do you deal with people with different cultures and languages, especially directors and directors generals? And also in the case of the new commissioners now, I'm sure you know the series Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. Do you prefer a commissioner who has a strong will and who knows what to do and knows his topic? Or do you prefer a commissioner who gives you freedom and does not know anything on his subjects? And there are other questions later if you want.
You should have interrupted me earlier. I didn't know you had lists, huh? So, is Grow...
It was so interesting, I could not interrupt.
Was it? Okay, I hope it wasn't too simple for you then, if you look like you know a lot more than what I was talking about. So, is Grow the most powerful? Difficult to say. We don't look at this like this. Obviously, it is among the more powerful ones because we have legislative competence. So there are DGs, there are also DGs who are like back office, so the budget or interpretation, translation, infrastructure, schools, etc. So there are like less important DGs. In terms of the power, people often like to think the DG competition is the most powerful one because they decide in the merger cases, state aid, etc., the antitrust. So they are powerful from the monetary perspective. Trade is among also the ones where they think is very powerful because they have the power to negotiate the free trade agreements. So they're very important in determining our relationship with the third countries, but we are very closely involved in all those negotiations. So in our directorate, we have our international unit, which coordinates all international aspects of all policies we are in charge of, and then provide input for DG Trade. So for instance, now we have negotiations ongoing with New Zealand, let's say, which is true that they are ongoing. And if, for instance, here we are in charge of chemicals legislation. If there was a stake of chemicals industry being important for New Zealand economy, then the trade colleagues are not going to go into the negotiations without our experts and without our input. So it's a very close collaboration. DG Regio is very important because they have a lot of money for regional development. So GROW is important for those who understand. So those who know what EU is about, they understand that internal market is the foundation, that we create the legislation for every single sector of the economy to work, to sell more easily and to sell more easily cross-border. We also have public procurement, which is around 14% of the economy. We have tourism, which is around 10% of the economy. We have space and defense. So these are multi-billion programs that we're in charge of here in GROW. So yeah, it's not the one that is most powerful. There is, I don't know if you know of the process called European semester, which is an annual exercise of the European Commission assessing how structural reforms are evolving in every member state. So we would look at reforms in the labor market, fiscal, education, budget, investment policy, whatever structural area you look at. And we publish an annual report where we say, as a commission, what we think is working or not working, where is it that we recommend the country to introduce a new other kind of reform or to speed up the process. And in the European semester work, there is a thing called core DGs, which can be looked at as a bit more important, which are the ones which are in charge of the core areas. And so GROW is part of it because we have the competitiveness of the businesses and industry, then you have employment there because of the labor market, you have ECFIN for financial and monetary economy, etc. So yeah, so yes, we like to think we're powerful, but we're not the only ones. You asked about executive competencies of GROW. I don't know what you mean. If you want to say a bit more in details, what do you understand by executive competencies? We have executive agencies, which every DG has. So ours are, for instance, EASME, which is Executive Agency for SMEs, which is in charge of implementing the COSME program. So here in DG, we design the policy. We say, what is it we want the money to go to and how much? And then in the executive agency, they manage the calls for grants and they manage the links and the relationship with the individual recipients. We also have another agency which is in Prague, which manages the space program. We also have an agency in Alicante in Spain, which manages the IP policy, intellectual property office. Again, which implements the IP policy that we develop here in GROW. So yeah, there's a lot. Who loses more in Brexit? The UK loses more. There's been multiple studies showing the possible impacts in various scenarios on the economy.
Sorry guys, the Wi-Fi was cut off by the restaurants now.
So you're back, okay. The UK is going to lose more. Multiple studies show possible impact in various scenarios on the individual economies. It depends which scenario and which institute you look at. In the UK, there's been scenarios over around 10% of the GDP. It can be really brutal. In EU, the effects are going to be much more dispersed, obviously, because it also depends on which country you look at. So Ireland obviously is brutally exposed because of the very intimate links with the UK, while countries like Slovakia, who have secondary dependency through, for instance, exports of certain products to the UK, are less exposed in terms of GDP impact. So yes, it's going to be the UK. Our relationship with the council, we are partners in the game. We know we wouldn't be here without the member states. So it's not like people say that we are, the dictators here. And more and more with the European process being more and more political over the past 1 or 2 mandates, the more closer the relationship with the council has become. And it's not like what you see on the outside, that the legislative act arrives to the council, is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of levels of collaboration that we have with the diplomats from the member state, where we're preparing the policies with them before they arrive to the minister level. And so we have expert groups where the diplomats go. There's all kinds of expert level discussions and diplomatic level discussions, where already when a policy is being thought of, the first reflex we have, let's go and ask the member states also to learn from each other when we have, especially for areas where it's like new trends, like technology is transforming the way a sector works. We always ask the member states to share their best practices with us, to tell us what pilots are ongoing, to really be on top of the pulse of what's happening in the member states. Otherwise, the relationship wouldn't work. And hopefully the same kind of very close relationship we will be able to build also with the new European Parliament, because this time is special in the sense that a very big share of the Parliament is composed of very new members, so the people who weren't in the Parliament before. So yeah, this is a relationships business where you need to understand the local context and what are the worries of the individual constituencies. Otherwise, the policy is never gonna get through, because we can think like academically what would be the best way of going forward for a policy. But if it's not gonna be voted for in the 2 houses, then it's never gonna see the light of the day. So it's in our interest to work with them very closely on a daily basis. How we deal with the other cultures and languages. This is an interesting thing, because it's one of the things I love most about Brussels, where like it's so multilingual and multicultural, and I love like speaking to people and guessing where they're from based on their accent. And sometimes you would like work with a colleague and not even know where they're from, because you have your guessing game running, but you don't ask them, because we are European so much that we sometimes don't even care where they're from. Like unless you like go for a beer with somebody at the work meeting, you wouldn't really go into asking, because it's like a certain profile that the European administration attracts. It's like McKinsey people, you exactly know what kind of personalities these guys and women are, people who go in the big 4 consultancy. So the European administration is similar in the sense that we are so similar in our values and education and being multilingual, etc., that we don't pay too much attention to where we're from. But we do use it in our, like, obviously in the informal context, and then at work when we need to understand the local context a little bit more, then we obviously go to colleagues where we need to understand the country for a certain policy area better. The language regime is interesting also, that we are it depends on a DG, but most of the DGs are very Anglo-French. Some of them are exclusively French, the ones which have been around for a long time, the more traditional ones, like the DG the budget people or HR people, like the more administrative ones, are very French because of the French administrative culture of the Commission. But the more and more English is the dominant language in most of the DGs, also since the 2004 enlargement, because many of the officials don't speak French good enough to be able to work in French. So the assumption is that everybody understands French, but you don't have to speak French at meetings. So every meeting that you go to has both English and French. Like today, I was in a 2-hour meeting where the French speak French, or the more senior Spanish speak French because they've been around for 30, 40 years. The younger people, the Eastern people, speak English. And so you would typically, like in a meeting, you would have a French director speaking French, and then me as a Slovak, I would reply in Slovak, in English, for instance. And it's normal and nobody really comments on it anymore. So it's like, you realize, like you would realize that you don't even know in which language the meeting happened, because it's like a mixture of everything. There's no German. The Germans gave up because they think it's more efficient to do it in the other 2 languages than to risk that somebody doesn't understand, or to rely on interpretation. Who do we prefer as a commissioner? I never really asked myself this question. It's an interesting question. Obviously, it's useful if a person had a contact with the policy area, because it simplifies, like the learning curve is obviously so much steeper. So it's better if they have a clue, but they are not there to understand the technicalities of a file. So of course it's useful, but it's more important, I think, that they are good politicians, that they are good leaders, that they listen, that they can surround themselves with good experts, that they can navigate the institutional game. So obviously it's very useful if a commissioner had contact with Brussels, as for instance, as a minister before, that they know the procedural ins and outs. But if I think I would still choose the soft aspects of, like, the whole leadership and knowing how to play the game. I would choose that over the expertise if I could choose. It's like, who do you choose as a CEO of a company or of a hospital? Like, is a better director of hospital, is it the best surgeon you can find, or is it the good manager? So it's a similar principle for me. Yeah, I think those were all questions that I noticed. Are there any others? Because it's 8 o'clock already, so I think we should wrap up, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt, that I will have to wrap up now. I have an American NGO to whom we'll have to report the final weeks of our project in Ukraine. So sorry to disturb you, but I will have to leave in a minute, really. But yeah. I would like to use this opportunity to thank you, and I really did my best in order to listen to you and listen to the current tendencies of what's going on inside the institution, so inside the what we call policy, right, and how this policy is being created, and how much of efforts should be listened to. My special interest got this transition period, because it's something that Ukraine is experiencing now, so I really wanted to compare. And my second, of course, the contributions of the member states, how they comply to the budget activities, and in this respect I take Italian example as not complying, and of course how the nominees for the commissioners are taken into consideration by the parliament, so they'll have to have some special kind of examen, so kind of a test, in front of them. Sorry to wrap up. If you will allow me, I'll send you some couple of technical questions later. You will have time. I'll be more than privileged that you consider them.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your project.
Thank you, friends. See you next session. Yeah, thank you.
Bye. So, what about the rest? Who's hungry? I'm really hungry.
Okay, cool. Well, I don't know, but if you want to end at around 8, then we should not ask questions, and maybe another time ask questions about your political game that you had when you were running.
Feel free to ask. Huh? I still have like 10 minutes to go, and then I'll go back to work. So.
Okay, that's okay for Maros. Then, when you said that you were running for politics, what was the worst and the best reactions of your colleague at the commission? When you met the citizens in Slovakia, what was their worst and their best reaction? I'm talking about experience, about coming with big ideas to change the world, and the people say, what do you have for me personally in your policy? And you first feel guilty because you have nothing for that person, and then they turn and say, hey, they don't want corrupt politicians, but they want politicians to give personal advantages to citizens. That's a bit awkward. And also in practice, really, with how many people in the room were you happy to have so many people? Because we have a picture of politicians with thousands of people at rallies, and were you happy with 10 people, with 30 people, with 50 people? Like, let's say the truth. You said that you had about 15,000 direct votes, if I understood well. Is it not a list voting? In how does it work in Slovakia? Is it just for your name? It sounds strange to me. And yeah, was it a general feeling you had before, a general feeling you had during, a general feeling you had on the night of the vote, and a general feeling you had when you came back to the commission, and what? Sorry, you have 2 or 3 minutes left. I think that's too short.
The reactions for my run were in the commission were much better than I expected. What I was expecting was that the bosses tell me, okay, if you have to, because like in the statute it says that we have the right to request a sabbatical for political campaigns, so they cannot really say no. And I was expecting like, okay, we'll manage, but they were really super excited, and they tell me like, really, like, go for it. And my director general back then, who left in the meantime, she said like, oh my God, everybody should go and try selling this shit on the ground. Otherwise we have no right to complain about our policies not being pushed through. So it was really, really supportive, and people like, like liking and really supporting me. The worst were along the lines of, it's going to destroy my career in the commission. Why the hell do you do this to yourself? And so for me, it was like, I don't care almost. It's like one of those things when you know it's your best place where you're supposed to be and you don't care about the risk. So it was, yeah, like, I'm gonna do it and let's see what it's gonna bring afterwards. The reactions at home, where it's not, when you say you have nothing to offer them, I always have something to offer them, because there's so much of the European stuff that they benefit from. It's really just pulling out the right card. It's more about empathy and understanding where the person is coming from, when they are complaining about something. There's always a piece of European policy or legislation that you can pull out from your kind of menu and show them like, listen, there's this little thing that you're not aware of. Like oftentimes I would do this handbag test where I would like pull stuff out of my handbag and show them, do you realize this is European legislation, and you wouldn't have your safe lipstick if there wasn't European legislation for chemicals, you know, like you wouldn't be buying products equally to how you buy them or not buy them when you travel to Asia and you don't know what the hell is in the product, right? So there's always little examples that people are not aware of. The most frustrating one in Slovakia is the case of corruption, where it comes to cases like the murder and a lot of money being stolen, like really bad corruption, where the competencies of the EU are really limited. So that's where I would then go into just listening and trying to show that I understand their fears, and that the only thing I can promise is that I'm gonna do my best up to a level where the European competencies allow us to be helpful. So that was the only kind of frustrating part of the conversation. With how many people I was happy? this was also part of the learning where you think there's going to be hundreds of people coming to see you. And what's interesting is that Slovakia had presidential elections in March, and there was this woman, Zuzana Čaputová, elected. And when I was unhappy about how many people I got at my events, people are like, there were like 20 people coming to see Zuzana beginning of February, because she had this like massive success curve towards the end of the campaign. But like when I was unhappy, people would always tell me like, you're getting more people than Zuzana was getting 3 months before her election. So I was getting around, I don't know, 20, 30, depends what kind of format it was, if it was my only event or if it was like a talk back to back at another event. I was really like, I think my cutoff line is around like 15. Then I had times when I would like travel across the country for like a stupid thing that somebody asked for, and then there were like 7 people showing up. Or like at the university where somebody's like, yeah, you gotta come here, I'm gonna put up this lecture for you. And so you expect that the whole like 100 people of the class would show up, and then you have 10 people in the room, and you're like, was it worth my full day, you know, and a lot of money on the logistics. Yeah. The system of the lists is that, yes, we have a list, so you have to run on a list, but we have preferential votes, which many countries don't have. So Slovakia has, every party that presented themselves for the elections had 14 candidates on the list, because we were electing 14 MEPs, members of the European Parliament. And so there's a list of 14 people that the country is offering. And when you vote, you pull out the list of the party. So you choose that you vote for Social Democrats, let's say. And then out of the list, you have the right to circle 2 names and give them preferential votes, which is why everybody does personal campaigns, because you can jump the list by getting more personal votes. So that's why I keep on saying that 15,000 is a good result, because you compare yourself against the other candidates, and then the more you get, the higher probability is that you jump the queue and get elected. And the general feeling is that I'm really grateful for the fact that I did it. I am grateful for like this mindset that I was in last year that made this possible, that I didn't, you know, like how many times you have these ideas of I should do this and that, and then you kill them because the conditions are not right, or you're scared, or you don't have the money, or somebody tells you it's impossible or whatever. So there are so many reasons why I could have just said no, like this is stupid, and why would you do this to yourself and to your career and all this. And for many reasons I didn't, and I'm really grateful for the fact that I did it, because it was like very expensive and very painful, but very transformative experience. And I would never, and I never regretted a single day or a single euro of the campaign. And I, like, the only thing I'm doing since I'm back in June, I've organized like multiple lunchtime series, like talks here, where I share with the colleagues how it was, and I tell everybody. I already persuaded one Portuguese colleague that she said that because of me, she's going to work on this and present herself in 5 years in Portugal. So I think it's really important for us to show up and communicate more. And some people are going to present themselves. Some people are just gonna open their Twitter account for the first time because they haven't had one, and they're gonna start communicating more. And so that's the feeling that I came back with, when some of the people were like, oh, I'm sorry you weren't elected. And some people were like, oh my God, you're so courageous and I'm so proud of you. So this was also very interesting sociological exercise to listen to the reactions in June when I was back to Brussels, and people coming from, obviously, from their space. Some of them thinking that I would be super embarrassed because it's a failure. And I'm like, no, it's not a failure. It's like the most mind-blowing experience. Like, you buy yourself a car and I bought myself a campaign. So yeah, that's the intention that I had when I got back here in summer, to use the fact that people are curious about the experience, to use it as an entry point into a conversation where it's not so much about my sharing, it's about what is it that you can do to start communicating more as well. Because if we don't do this, then we're fucked, and this whole place, I mean, we can all go home in 5 years if we don't improve this. Yeah, I think that was all of them. So
okay, thanks.
Maros, do you have some last question? Or you can meet also Lucia in person, so you can like throw tons of questions. But if you have a last one, go ahead, and then we will.
Yeah, I think I have a short one, which is after the campaign ended, have you been relieved, or were you sad that you didn't get the vote?
It's there was a very messy phase, I have to say. People often ask me like, did you really believe you can be elected? Like, when is it that you thought it could like end up successfully? So like the day of the vote, also because the elections are on Saturday, so Saturday morning I went to vote with my team, and then we had like a nice day together. And the elections were running in around Europe all the way through Sunday. So we knew that we were only going to get the results on Sunday around 11 p.m. at night. And we started getting the rumors Sunday afternoon. So Sunday was very difficult emotionally to handle. Like, could it be possible? Could it not be possible? And then I knew that it's not possible. And so obviously you're sad for a while, and then after a while you forget the difficult stuff. I'm happy with the result for our coalition. So of the people who were elected, I'm happy which ones it is. So it's possible that if it was other people elected, I could be more pissed off. But because of who we got in, I'm really happy about the result. So that's good. And yeah, it was a combination of obviously fatigue. That was the first thing that kicked in. I had a little burnout, I guess, for a couple of weeks when I was like super tired and I just couldn't do anything, and I would hate people. I wouldn't like go to events because it really felt like I left my soul in Slovakia, like in those thousands of conversations. And I was like, if you show me the stars one more time, I hate the stars, because I would do my campaign with a European flag on my back, and I would have like European dress and European hoodie and European this and that. And I hate the stars. So there was a couple of weeks where I had to recharge a little bit, and then it's just gratitude and pride and gratitude for the experience and curiosity what it's gonna bring, because now we are at such a stage of reconstruction and seeing what's gonna happen to the institution, that I'm curious what's gonna be the next phase, and how can I build on the experience.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
It was exciting. I never forget your election night.
Yes, Atka was there, yes.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And as this session. And, Lucia, it was great. You brought an energy, you brought your wisdom, you brought technical wisdom as well, and you combined it all, which I would say all of us appreciated, at least understanding and seeing the questions from people. People can be very bored from institutionalism of EU, and I think these people were not at all. Me counted as well, and thank you for being enthusiastic about all these ideas about conscious politics, bringing it to the practice, and always being cheerful and with a lot of energy. So this is my thanks a lot, and you can approach Lucia if you need or if you want, and if she finds the time, she's in our closed group, as you both are. We'll see each other in 2 weeks, but you can keep in touch with Lucia Marov, maybe in person, Johan up to his travels, and we will do as well. And thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your sharing, and thanks for your hacking mode of EU institutions and positivity.
Thanks for the invitation. I hope it was useful, and good luck with the rest of the academy. I don't know what you had ahead, but I'm sure it's a very interesting experience, so take the most out of it. And I'm here if ever you have questions, or if you come to Brussels, I'm here. I'm gonna stick around for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Lucia, for all these insider tips from the Commission and political life.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions.
And
have a good night. Have a good evening.
Yeah, have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.